Discussing Susan Neiman. She's a philosopher out of Germany. She is actually born in the U.S., but I believe works in Potsdam, if I'm not wrong, somewhere there. She was on a podcast, Precht. It's a German podcast. There's a link in the show notes. It is in German, but nevertheless, I think it's worth discussing because the discussion is about woke and how woke is devouring the civil rights movement. In fact, woke is devouring the very pillars of universal human dignity and respect, which is what the civil rights movement was built on. So, in other words, the precise movements that led to the liberation of suppressed humans, whether it's people of color, colonized people, or even or women or minorities in any kind of context of Western Europe and the United States. So the very movements that allowed for a discourse and the subsequent liberation of suppressed human beings, that very pillar is being undermined by the woke movement. The woke movement is reverse racism, it's tribalism, it's you against me. If white people march for Black Lives Matter, that's fine, but it's a black fight, and you white people are just collaborators here. If we are trying to help, black people maybe get to universities, that's fine, but you're just being used to enhance my tribe, whether that is, the tribe of elite, academics that have a certain axe to grind with the rest of the establishment, or whatever it may be. So it's a very tribal atmosphere that woke is creating, which is exactly the reverse of the civil rights movement, or if you want to go one step further back, even the reverse of the Enlightenment, which was the movement of opening up the universal dignity of human mankind. Now, here at Not Even Wrong podcast, we certainly talk about all kinds of subjects, including political subjects. We are in an election year. We're a hedge fund, so of course we care about these things, and we discuss them every now and then. And we just spoke about the decline of courage recently, which is part of a sort of series of I would say our contribution to the election conversation. The way we stand is we believe that the current regime that runs the United States is really bad for business. It's bad for the economy. It's bad for upward mobility. It's bad in many ways for almost anybody but the elites. I think what we went through in during COVID was sort of, I call it the storm of the Bastille by the elites. So it wasn't the storm of the Bastille, which is, of course, we're alluding to the French Revolution. This wasn't an uprising of the poor and the suppressed. This was an uprising of the elites and the credentialed, in particular the academic elites and the public health industrial complex that really took over the reins of the country. Whether it's Anthony Fauci, who single-handedly started ordering lockdowns and threatened everybody who would oppose it, whether it's Google or Twitter, the old Twitter, censoring people questioning vaccines or masks. All these things were literally a grasp of the reins of power of the credential. I call them the wealthy and credentialed elite. So whether it's a Mark Cuban or Steve Jobs' wife or Reid Hoffman, or whether it's numerous academics across U.S. universities who took it upon themselves to decide what is and what isn't. So what we went through is, again, it's a revolution of the elites against the working man, against the working woman, against the citizen, against individual liberty, and against the universal humanistic approach towards societies, which is first and foremost, we're all human beings, and we have to respect our humanity. We have to respect the Habeas Corpus Act that has been written in law in Britain in the 18th century, but really has been going on for 1,000 years, which is you have the right to your body, you have the right to your property, which is not part of the habeas corpus act, but it's a logical evolution of that. So all of these things have been thrown overboard in the name, of course, in the name of COVID, but COVID was just a pretext. I don't believe that even Anthony Fauci ever believed in his gospel about lockdowns and all of that stuff. I think it was just a pretext for the wealthy and the elites and the credentialed to suck money from the system. We had trillions of dollars of deficits since then, so there was real money involved. We had a lot of credentialed, educated people working from home, which means not working or barely doing any work while the people that they're supposedly trying to protect with their wokeism, the colored people that work for Amazon, the people of color, of course, I'm sorry, but those types of people who work these jobs, they still had to work and they still had to go and deliver the groceries to the elites. So it was a horrible time, and we're still living in those times. And I think Kamala Harris and this whole Democratic National Convention situation that we went through, a month ago, is horrible. Where it's just a puppet was installed to keep running the system for the favor of the credentialed and the elites. So what we're trying to do here is dissect the woke movement and discuss it a little bit deeper. And you might ask why we do that, right? What the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So why are we in the business of discussing wokeism and political movements? Well, we're in the business because there's an election here. It's important because running a business or a hedge fund or being an investor in a society that is gradually moving towards tribalism and fascism, which the woke movement is the driving force of, a society like that is not good for business. So we would have to start thinking about how to position ourselves in a situation like that. This is not something that's going to happen overnight, because the credentials and the wealthy have an incentive to keep the financial system running. So they're not just going to throw it overboard, but the fear is that the system will throw itself, it will eat itself, it will devour itself on its own, and the elites will just sort of collapse under it. Very similar to other revolutions, French Revolution, Bolshevik Revolution, that started devouring itself. So that's why we're talking about this. We're also talking about this because I think it's time to take a stance. It's too important not to take a stance about political things, and we're not talking about whether it's okay to castrate young boys or things like that. We have opinions about that too, but we're not even talking about that. We're really talking about the big picture here, which is the fundamental problem of wokeism, which is that it's a reversal to tribalism, that it's an overthrowing of fundamental values of Western democracies, in particular the universal respect of and dignity of humans is being thrown overboard for the benefit of certain minorities or certain types of individualities that supposedly need to be protected, while they were protected already before under the organic evolution of freedom and habeas corpus and property rights and all of these things. That was the main reason why people flocked in thousands and millions to Western democracies. So there was no need to radically change that and impose it on our society. So the reason woke is happening is certainly started, in my opinion, it started actually as a very legitimate movement, according to Susan Neiman. It started in the 1940s. And it really meant to be awake about racism and things like that. And that's perfectly fine. It started before the civil rights movement. Then we had the civil rights movement, and there's certainly a lot of malfunctioning of the US society even after that. And it's perfectly fine to look at them and understand them and try to fix them. But what's not okay, again, is to turn that into a reverse racism and create tribalism and create sort of like you against me type of movement, which is what the woke movement has become. Now, how do we get out of this? Certainly, Trump winning the election is certainly a step towards that. I think the people that align themselves with Trump are mostly pro-liberty, pro-human dignity and human passions and emotions and love type people, versus the people that align themselves with Kamala Harris are increasingly scary, totalitarian, coercive type people, or just crazy people like Mark Cuban, who in my opinion just don't know exactly what they want, or that's just an elephant in the porcelain store, and that's dangerous. And then you have people like maybe Reid Hoffman, who in my opinion just pure evil. They're scary. They're dangerous people because they're destroying our society for personal benefit, maybe personal protection. I don't know if the Epstein affair is so scary to them that they just want to destroy the establishment so they cannot be held, judged for what they did, whether they did any sexual crimes or not, or tax evasion crimes. That's not up to me to decide. But it seems to me that the motivation there comes from very dark corners. So back to the main topic of this episode. Again, it's about woke. It's discussing Susan Neiman at the Precht podcast, and I think it's sometimes good to go outside and look how other people are perceiving us here in the U.S. And while Susan is American, but she has her German's perfect, so she probably has been living there for a long time. And she's a very good person to look at the woke movement because I think she grew up in the South. She's Jewish. Her parents were parts of the civil rights movement, and they were fighting, I think, the right fight, the fight that we've seen in movies like Mississippi Burning and other movies where there is really a necessity to help Black people in the South overcome massive discrimination and racism. But that was in the name of a universal respect of humans. I think Martin Luther King and anybody else who was aligned with the civil rights movement, John F. Kennedy and all that part of the political spectrum, I think they were not tribalists. They weren't saying, well, we need to fight for Black people and at the same time discriminate against white people or Asian people or things like that. And that's exactly what the woke movement is doing today. Now, they're using pragmatic arguments, whether it's at universities for DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, where they say, well, we need to help other people get access to universities because somehow they don't have access, while in fact, actually anybody who has the will and the persistence to work hard academically, in my opinion, particularly in California, has any kind of road is open to them to succeed at the academic level. So these roads have been already opened, and these tribalistic, in my opinion, fascistic movements like DEI are not just morally appalling, but really dangerous, because you have a couple of developments from there. One is you have, if you sacrifice meritocracy for some ideological goal, you will have a society that grows less, that has less prosperity, and that's going to hurt the poor people more than anybody else. If you confiscate wealth, like Kamala is at least trying to do, you will have capital flight and all of these things that economists have been talking about for centuries. And then most importantly, you also have a reaction. Like, don't forget, the whole woke movement started again in the 1940s, according to Susan Neiman, because white people were racist against Black people. And if you turn this around and now you introduce racism against white people, well, you're going to get a response from them. And that response is not going to be pretty. And we don't want to have a society like that. That's what we're not. That's exactly what we've been working for hundreds of years. We've been building a system, starting with the Enlightenment, of mutual understanding, of living together, of showing the courage, having discourse, disagreeing, slugging it out in the court of law, in the discourse, and having the market of ideas and arguments win. That was the base of Western democracies. And that's not what the woke movement is. The woke movement is a totalitarian doctrine, top-down. This is how it is. If you don't agree, you get canceled, you get confiscated, you get jailed. And we don't need to read the Gulag Archipelago or watch movies or read books how bad fascism and communism were. It hasn't been that long ago. It's not even been 100 years. And the Soviet Union has not even been 50 years since it collapsed. So we need to be incredibly, there's a sense of urgency. That's my point. There's a sense of urgency for all of us to recognize what it is. Sometimes you just have to recognize what it is before you can do something. So wokeism is reverse racism, it's tribalism, and it's bad. It's bad because we don't want to fall back into that society. And we don't want to provoke a reaction from the people that are now suppressed, which is the white people, whether it's in the US or in Europe, against all these numerous so-called minorities that in many cases probably aren't even the main actors. The main actors are the elites and the credentialed elites who are provoking all of this. I would say that I have a lot of black friends, or friends of colored skin. They don't have a problem with me. I think they're not the instigators. I have friends, with Harvard emails that I feel like they have a problem with me, and I don't understand why. They seem to have a problem. They seem to envy a position that I'm in, or maybe my wealth, which is not that big. And I wonder why. When I came to the United States 25 years ago, I was under the impression that wealth creation here is not a bug. It's a feature of the system. And now I'm being portrayed as somebody who is somehow taking advantage of people, while all I'm doing is what everybody else has been doing here for 200 years, which is invest capital into new concepts and engineering practices that help improve the human condition. So how can this be a bad thing? So to summarize, I wanted to bring this episode out because I think it's time to take a stance for us also when it comes to where this country stands, how we feel about it. It's important. The purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. And running a hedge fund also implies having a view of how society is changing. And sometimes society is changing to the better and sometimes to the worse. We had some good developments. We had President Obama, which I think was a good time in this country. We had Trump, which was a little bit of a shock, but actually ended up being decent as a president. The country was okay, but the elites were under pressure, whether it's the elites in the universities or the elites in the deep state. And then the COVID pandemic, which was probably not engineered, but in some ways an inside job, even if it was just that some people were just looking the other way while it was happening because it was fitting their bill. So then, since then, we have a really bad movement in this country towards totalitarian tribalism, against the universal respect of human dignity, towards you against me type situations. And that's what we're discussing here, and that's what we're incredibly opposed at. We're prepared to fight against that, for the universal respect and dignity of humans, for the values of the Enlightenment, for inclusion, of course, and for the true merit-driven diversity that is a characteristic of every society, of every successful society. By the way, whether it's a successful sports team, a successful company, or a successful country, diversity works, but it has to be the right kind of diversity. and not the engineered kind of diversity. Thank you.